Ladies and gentlemen, mermaid and mermen of all ages, get your cave snorkels ready because we have an incredibly inspiring guest today. Welcome back to another episode of Teach Me to Dive. And today we have a treat for you. Our guest today is no ordinary diver. She is truly a force of nature and a real-life underwater explorer who can swim circles around the Bermuda Triangle. This woman has dove everywhere from collapsing caves in the Antarctic to the warm seas of the South Pacific. Jill Heinerth has had an amazing and storied career in diving and is certainly no stranger to exploring the deeps and depths of success and life. We are in for a real treat today as we get ready to discuss her views on success, diving, and the future. We have some seriously valuable insights coming your way, so make sure you watch all the way to the end. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the like button to make sure you get future notifications. Trust us, you're not going to want to miss a second of the oceanic goodness we have in store for you. Now, again, my name is Benjamin Hadfield, and I'm a technical dive instructor with Teach Me to Dive, connecting divers with quality instructors, dive shops, dive locations, and dive agencies for training around the world. Jill, thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here.
Well, Jill, we're just jumping right into the middle of this. How did you get started in diving?
I wanted to dive, from my earliest memories. I was just captivated by the water environment. But I didn't get a chance to take a class. I did my first dive as a teenager, but I didn't get a chance to take a class until I was in university. And it was, sort of financial more than anything. I wanted to save enough money to take the program and get some gear. And I wish I had started younger.
I think all of us have that idea. I just interviewed a homeschool program that specializes in doing a dive program as part of their homeschool group. And
Cool.
I was so jealous because they have 10 and 12-year-olds in their group. So I think
Yeah.
that's a common one among us that we dive and dive regularly, that if we could have only started at 6, we'd have been
Right.
perfect.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Jill, what initially drew you to cave diving, though? That's a pretty big jump.
Well, as a little kid, I loved caving and like hiking around the Bruce Trail in Southern Ontario, and so my first, opportunity to kind of poke my head in a cave underwater happened quite early in my diving career, and when I, moved around in that space and could just like take a breath and rise up and exhale and drop down and move around in that 3D space, it was just mesmerizing to me, and I knew that I wanted to do more.
That's amazing. Where was that at?
That was actually in, Tobermory at Fathom 5 National Marine, Park, at a little place called The Grotto. It's just a tiny little, like, you do a short swim through, and then you pop up into a grotto that actually surfaces, like, inside a
Mhm.
cave. So, probably, not a place I should have been so early in my diving career. But I just remember, sort of popping into that big room where the light was cascading down from a hole in the ceiling, and it was just like a cathedral to me.
Now, how old were you when this happened?
Oh, I was, in my late 20s. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that hardcore adventurous mode where we don't know better, but we should.
Yeah. Yes.
Fair
Yeah.
enough. Well, you've been in some pretty amazing expeditions and challenges and dives as well, and written about them, of course. Can you
Mhm.
share any challenging expeditions that you have been on, and how did you overcome some of the biggest obstacles?
Oh gosh. I guess I'm known for going to difficult places that people haven't been before. So have had plenty of opportunities to explore caves that nobody's been in before, or to be the first to cave dive inside an iceberg down in Antarctica. Chasing my way through a cave system within the iceberg. But expeditions can be challenging for so many reasons. Like, I led an expedition in the western desert of Egypt shortly after the Arab Spring, when Egypt had no leader, and I'm literally walking into like a civil war, and gunfire on the border, between Libya and Egypt. So there are a lot of challenges in expeditions, from the diving challenges to comfort to fitting into cultural situations, and yeah, it's been an interesting life.
Absolutely, that is amazing. So, can you think of a particularly difficult expedition you had in terms of diving, and how did you overcome the obstacles on that?
Well, people always ask me about the whole cave diving inside of icebergs, and that was obviously incredibly dangerous. We made a 12-day crossing of the Southern Ocean from New Zealand to get to the Ross Sea just to intercept this iceberg, which was the largest iceberg in recorded history. And yet, still, when we were down there, we had to, learn on the fly. Like, there's no handbook for somebody that's doing something that hasn't been done before. And so every day informs you of new risks and issues that you have to overcome. And certainly in the iceberg, we experienced like ice calving and closing the door of the cave we'd gone into. We experienced like currents that we could not swim against. Like, we got swept through an iceberg. We, on one occasion, had great difficulty getting out of our iceberg cave, and literally mere hours after our last dive on that project, the entire cave system I'd just been inside of literally like broke and fractured and shattered into a gazillion pieces floating on the surface of the sea.
Oh my goodness. So
Yeah.
tell me what's going through your mind as you're having this difficulty time exiting a iceberg cave in the middle of nowhere with no handbook and no expectation, difficulty through the portion. What's going through your mind at
Yeah.
this point?
Yeah. A lot of things. I mean, I knew that we're kind of walking that fine line, like we might not get home. Like, the first thing I said to the chief scientist after that dive was, the cave tried to keep us today. But in the moment of sort of fighting to get out, all you're thinking about is like the next best thing to do. What's the next thing I can do? What's the next thing I can do? And I do remember at one point my colleague screamed out, help me with the camera, because he's got this, $250,000 camera that he's also trying to pull out of the cave. And I just yelled back, fuck the camera. I apologize for my language. But in all seriousness, like, I have friends that have lost their lives trying to like haul broken equipment out of a cave. Like, now, if the camera wasn't broken, but if it's likely to cost you your life, then come back for it or dump it forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's
Camera
a
can be
lot of
replaced.
things. Yeah. So I guess I was angry. Angry at the cave, angry at my dive partner at that moment. We got over it.
That's an interesting expression. That I was angry at the cave, and knew that it was,
Yeah.
certainly it is what it is, and Mother Nature, Mother Earth,
Yep.
certainly have their own opinions on what we're going to be able to accomplish and not.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. So over the years, you've noticed and had a storied career. Truthfully, how do you feel technology has advanced in the field of cave diving and what you do, and how have you incorporated that?
Oh, I mean, technology has been a huge part of my career in cave diving and exploration, and I've tried to kind of stay on the cutting edge, because when someone says, "We want you to go here, but we don't know how you're gonna do it," um, and to me, that's just more of a challenge. It's more of a challenge to find the right technology to make things happen. So I was a, very, very early adopter of rebreathers in the mid-1990s, and, served as a test pilot for countless, organizations and brands, in the really early days when things were quite developmental. Um, so yeah, rebreathers have been an important part of extending my range, but I've also been kind of at the forefront of working with engineers who've designed new survey technologies, like 3D mapping devices that we can literally, at the time, swim through the cave to map the cave. But now, these kinds of devices are fully autonomous, artificially intelligent robots that can map the cave without me. So yeah, whether it's for life support, surveying, or even camera technology, I've tried to stay like right on the edge.
That's been amazing, absolutely. And so you come off very differently than what people expect. I mean, you,
Oh no, what do you expect?
well, with the voice and everything, you come off as this conservative, nice person that you could be my next door neighbor, right? You come
Okay.
off as that very much as the woman next door that we kind of hang out with. We exchange recipes and cookies and go off in that, and then all of a sudden it's the cave tried to kill me. I'm doing these major cave dives expedition. I was in this situation with bullets flying, and
Yeah.
then there's a video that I absolutely love, and to some of my advanced classes I've shown it to. That at the beginning of the video, it's my favorite, is do not do this, you will die.
Yeah.
of you exploring partial pressure in
Mm.
and hypoxia with a rebreather.
Oh, yeah. That video.
That video.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the context for that was that in the very early days of rebreather developments, of course, like, there are no classes, right? The gear gets invented, developed, but there's no educational program, and so I
Mhm,
was, like, in the really early days of developing the training programs that we would use to teach people about how to safely use rebreathers. But I didn't have an instructor, you know? There was no one to teach me, and so, literally, like, my friends and I that were working on this exploration project sat down and were like, "Alright, so how can this thing kill us?" Well, apparently hypoxia, apparently, like, and for those that don't know that what it is, that's, like, not enough oxygen and you pass out.
mhm,
Hyperoxia, too much oxygen; hypercapnia, too much carbon dioxide. Like, there's a lot that can go wrong when you're manipulating your life support environment. And so, we thought, "Gee, I wonder what these things feel like." Like, if
mhm.
it's coming on underwater, if you're getting symptoms, would you have time to react and abort to a situation like that? And so we did some pretty crazy, like, dry classroom experiments, sort of trying to kill each other in the classroom. Um, just to see if we had any sort of precursor symptoms that would inform us about what was coming, and the answer is, like, for the most part, no. So, although I was able to abort from a hypoxia situation, it was only after watching my colleague not be able to abort. So, and that's sitting in a classroom with no other distractions. I mean, if you're underwater, I think it's more likely just to get you. And
Fair enough.
by the time you realize, what we learned was that by the time you are compromised, like, and you know that something's gone wrong, you've already lost the capacity to act. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So
Mhm.
that's a big part of what you do. I mean, it sounds like from an early age that you've moved onto that edge of the anxiety scale and started moving along on that and experiencing and understanding the anxiety scale quite a bit. So how has that taught you and what have you learned about anxiety in these expeditions through this process?
Mm. A lot of people think that I'm fearless. I'm not fearless. I'm scared every time I go diving, and wanna dive with people that are scared because it means that we both respect the risks that we're taking. And so, it's really important to me to be, like, honest with myself and with my family as well about the risks that I'm taking, and then be really careful about self-assessment before a dive, because just because I have, over 8,000 dives and, a full-time, concentration of diving in my life, it doesn't mean that I'm ready to dive every day. So there are times when I can't. And so it's important, I guess, the honesty, the authenticity, and and to keep that close to your heart.
That's a huge thing, and it's something we definitely
Yeah.
talk about within, teaching classes, especially getting
Mhm.
into technical classes. You need to have a little bit of fear. It's okay to have
Mhm.
that, and it's even more okay, and I'm very proud. I've had several students over the last few months that have called dives because they hit that point. They said, "You know what? I'm not ready," and I make it a
That's
high
great.
a
Yeah.
point of saying, give them the high five or the fist bump, and good job. I'm really, really proud of you. Thank you for taking the understanding of yourself and being self-aware enough to say, "I'm not
Yeah.
ready for this."
I'm so glad to hear that, because that's that's life changing in every way for somebody. It was very early in my diving career when an instructor patted me on the back for stepping away from a dive, and I felt in the moment, I felt very, like, vulnerable and exposed, and I felt like an idiot, just for saying, "Hey, I don't feel like I'm ready for this." And then it turned out it was like a trick. He was actually trying to lure the other divers into doing something they weren't ready for, and so when I spoke up and said, "Nuh-uh, not me," and he patted me on the back, that was huge for me. It was so important for me as a young diver, and I've carried that through my whole life. I actually just saw that instructor a few weeks ago and said, "Hey, that one thing you said to me on the boat may have, like, saved my life and changed my life." Yeah.
It's important, and I
Mhm.
love hearing somebody with your experience re-express that as well, and
Mm.
to the point of sometimes the dive just ain't right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Completely okay. When's the last time you
Mhm.
called a dive?
Oh gosh, I do all the time. Yeah, I mean, sometimes before a dive, like, I often go on a trip and then, like, I have learned that on expeditions and trips and things that the very last dive of a trip is kind of the most dangerous. It's when people kinda go, "Oh, I just wanna dump this last reel into the cave," or, "Oh, but I just want to do this or that or get this photo," kind of thing. And people sometimes make foolish safety decisions on the very last dive of a trip, and so frequently, like for me recently in Truck Lagoon, great place, travel halfway around the world to get there. You spend a lot of money to be there, but I sat out the last dive. I'm like, I've had a great trip. It's been exceptional. I've got some good images, and I'll just save this one in the can for next time, kind of thing. So I often get to the end of a trip and I tell everyone on the boat, I'm like, "Listen, this is the most dangerous dive of the trip, and just want you to stay safe and stay vigilant, and I'm going to eat cookies."
There's nothing wrong with eating cookies, that is for sure.
That's right. Yeah. Mhm.
Sometimes the best part of the dive too. You get done with the dive, you
Absolutely.
had a little bit of a tough time, you get back to the boat, you sit down, and you take that breath, and you have a cookie.
Free cookies. Yeah.
My wife will tell you though, that's my, kryptonite is the cookie, the chocolate chip
Mm.
cookie.
Yeah.
We all have
I'm
to
with
have
you.
that one thing. I have a couple. So we have definitely questions for you from other amazing women divers, and this one comes from
Mhm.
Jenny Brockflower, who's a course director
Mhm.
at a local shop here, and she says, "What specific challenges did you face as a woman in the diving industry?"
Well, in the early days of my diving career, I was frequently like the only woman on the boat or in the class or whatever, and so I definitely faced like both intentional sexism and unintentional bias. There's no question. That still happens these days, but not to as much of a degree, and whether that's just because I've, reached a more mature age when, people don't talk back to a woman or not, I don't know. But that was challenging. I mean, there were times when people told me I was like moving too fast. I was too big for my britches was one of the quotes,
Oh
or
my goodness.
yeah, just because I was like, class to class to class, kind of taking a lot of different classes. But even more recently, when I was mentoring women to become cave diving instructors, and I do that freely without being compensated because I wanted to see more women in instruction. And when they were trying to get their opportunity to take their exam, they were told that they were part of Jill's silly little girls club, and that's hurtful. They were actually told, "We don't need any more women cave diving instructors." So that sexism is still present in many parts of society, not just in diving. But I have, developed my own thick skin, but I also realize today that those expressions of sexism, racism, ageism, whatever else, they're not about me. Those comments are about the person posting or the person saying those things. It's about their insecurities and their life experiences. And I'm not letting that reflect on what I do or how I do it, because I'd rather just sit back and say, "Hey, watch me."
I can appreciate that, and certainly
Yeah.
most of us have watched your career, and you've definitely had a, "Oh, yeah, I can't do that? Yeah, watch me." I love that about you. Absolutely. It's definitely enjoyable. So I'm really excited. You mentor young women through this process, and it's amazing because
Mhm.
we need to bring more women up into the industry, especially to your level of instructor, instructor trainers, and the like within Cave. How do you approach mentoring women in the industry?
Oh, casually and formally. I mean, last night, Christina Zanotto and I, and a couple other members from the Women Divers Hall of Fame were on a call with a dozen early career ocean professional, women that just jumped on a call with us to be mentored. They
Mhm.
want to know like what barriers we had in our career and how we overcame them, um, and so we gave a bit of a presentation and then a dialogue with the women specifically about their own issues. So sometimes it's in situations like that. Last summer, I took on an intern, a young woman who was exceptional. She traveled with me on expeditions, and we made a short film, and now she's running her own expeditions. So it's kind of cool, but wherever I go, I also try to reach out to school groups and kids and try to be the vision of that woman I wish I had met when I was 10.
That brings up an excellent point of how can we be the person we wish we had had in our lives?
Mm,
How do you approach that? I mean, we all see
mhm.
that. I see that in my life. There's a lot of times where I needed that mentor and I didn't
Yeah.
have it. So I try and be that. But how do you approach that? Trying to be the person you wish you'd had?
Well, gosh, I think you just wanna be an enabler. So, yeah, I mean, when someone says, "Is this possible?" You say, "Yes." Because I remember there were plenty of doors that kind of got slammed in my face, and when you're a young person and that happens, you don't try to go through that door again. When someone says there's no room for women in commercial diving, you just kinda go, "Oh, okay, I didn't know," and then you switch directions. So I think the first thing is just to be the enabler to say, "Yes, anything is possible with hard work and patience," but also encourage connections. So encourage people to connect and collaborate and reach out because, that's where the strength of the modern internet is. Although, there are certainly, things that people get tripped up with in the modern internet, but the best part is that we are all globally interconnected now, and you can just reach out to someone that you don't know and say, "Hey, will you come on my podcast?"
Boy, here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
Yep. That has definitely been one of the amazing parts with the internet. I mean, there's two parts
Yeah.
of the internet. With all good comes bad. I mean, we certainly have to deal with the trolls, but
Mhm,
Benjamin Franklin said, Our critics are our friends. They show us our faults,
mhm.
and sometimes they show us their
They show
faults
us
as
their
well."
faults.
Exactly, which is a great point as well. And
Yeah.
I think it's a great perspective to look at it. That when somebody's criticizing us, it's not always about our own faults. It's a
Mhm.
lot of times about theirs, and
Yeah.
sometimes how can we help them, and sometimes you can't.
Mhm.
Unfortunately,
Yes. Indeed.
it is what it is. So
Yeah.
Jill, you've had a storied career. So we all fail and have setbacks in our
Mhm.
career. What's a major setback you had in your career, and how did you bounce back out of that?
Oh, there's no failures in life.
Awesome.
Seriously. No, I look at failures or setbacks as discovery learning. So it's, I look back at the good, the bad, the ugly, the difficult, the terrible, and the great stuff. And everything that's happened in my life up until this point was informative to me that built who I am today. And
Mhm.
and so I don't look back on anything, sort of regretfully as failures, because you don't invent the light bulb the first time you go and step into that process. And so I've kind of let myself off the hook in that regard, but certainly, like, from everything from kind of losing my nest egg early in my life to some unscrupulous business partners to living out of a trailer for 2 years after a divorce, you know uh just trying to rebuild my life and career. So I mean, there's certainly been lots of setbacks, like financially, logistically, that I've had to overcome to have this weird, almost entrepreneurial kind of a career
Mhm.
in the water, but it's been worth it.
That's it, and I'm glad you bring that up, and some of the I wouldn't say setbacks, but learning opportunities. I had a
Yeah.
coach early on in high school and college that would tell me that there are no losses; there are only
Mhm.
learned for. And so you have that opportunity that you just weren't quite ready at that moment. You just need
Yep.
to learn more. But we
Yeah.
don't think about that. I mean, I think the outside world will look at somebody like Jill and they say, "Wow, she's so successful. She has all these books and these expeditions and Palau and truck and diving an iceberg in Antarctica," which is, you and I both know that's not a cheap expedition either in any way. But we don't look back and we say, wait a minute, how did she get from point A to point B? It was not like
Mhm.
all of a sudden somebody came in along and said, here, Here
Yeah.
are the keys to the kingdom. You said you lived in a trailer, lost your nest egg,
Yeah.
unscrupulous business partner. And I think it's amazing to kind of see that there's a realness to this. And like I was talking to Mike Young the other day, and
Mhm.
he goes through. He says, "Yeah," he says, we lived above a dive shop that we were able to negotiate out a deal with. That if we helped clean up the shop, that they'd let us live in the attic.
Yeah, there you go.
So
And, there's so much about especially within the diving industry when you're trying to build a career, in a cash poor industry, I would say, there are a lot of creative collaborations and partnerships that occur. I mean, even with, like, major manufacturers, like, I do have, like, brand relationships with certain manufacturers, and people just assume, "Oh, they send you free gear. You're so lucky." And I'm incredibly, appreciative when someone sends me a dry suit or harness or something at no cost. It's part of what I've really needed to fuel this career. Um, but it's a partnership. They're not just sending me free gear. It means that I need to go out and take pictures and make videos and give some
mhm.
presentations for them, and there's an expectation that this is a two-way relationship, not a one-way relationship. And so all of those relationships, whether it's with a brand or with a person or a shop or an instructor or whatever, like, you have to realize that, like, there's work on your end too, and so it is something that needs to be mutually beneficial to be sustainable in the long run.
Absolutely. And I think most people don't realize that by the time you do get that first free harness, you've already spent probably $150,000 in gear to get to that point where you get the free one. And do you really need the next free one?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And you still spend $150,000 on gear.
You do, absolutely. It is.
Yeah,
It wasn't cheap getting to that investment point where it just started paying
yeah,
back a little bit.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Joe,
Mhm.
we've talked about a couple of oh crap moments, and I really like incorporating just the true oh crap moment. You talked about the iceberg, but we all have those great oh crap moments in our diving career, and cave divers have more than one. Absolutely. Can you share one really good one with us, and how did you prepare for that and handle the situation through the process?
Uh, yeah. So I had a dive with a scientist that I had not dived with before. We actually did 3 dives on this particular day, where we were planning to get some biological material samples for her work from the cave, and it was a really small cave. So I thought, let's just do a little dive, and then a little bit bigger, and then a little bit bigger, as we get to know each other. And on the second dive, we were about to enter a very small restriction. We had plenty of gas, but I called the dive, turned around and said, "Hey, let's go and get fresh tanks. If we're going through this restriction, we want all the air that is possible." So we'd done 2 dives on one set of tanks, so it's time to start fresh. And and that third dive was actually a horrific situation. My partner panicked at the maximum penetration point and got disoriented. The cave was only as high as about the space underneath your bed, very, very small space. And and so we ended up in a situation where she's stuck, panicked. We have no visibility and a broken guideline. So kind of like everything that could possibly go wrong happened within the course of about a minute. But we both made it home safely that day. There wasn't a skill that I needed that I hadn't learned in a cave diving class, and I just needed to perform those drills that I'd done a million times before and taught a million times before. So yeah, I patched the guideline. I dealt with zero visibility. I got my partner, reoriented. She headed out of the cave and I lost track of her. So I actually had to go further into the cave to make sure I wasn't leaving her behind and search the cave very methodically on the way out. But all of those were things that I was able to do because I'd made a good choice about going back in the cave with full tanks. Um so I really think that it's the choices you make before you go diving that are most likely to affect your likelihood of survival. So it's the approach to the safety protocols, and then the diligent application of those protocols every single time, without wavering, because it's really easy to get it's really easy to get swept up in the moment, swept up in the location, swept up in the experience.
Mhm.
But as we spoke about just a few minutes ago, probably the ultimate rule of survivors is knowing when to abort or when to turn around, or also know that, you know, before my dive, I knew I was capable of self-rescue and I knew I was capable of buddy rescue. I just have to do it now.
That is absolutely amazing. And it's good. Preparation before the dive, utilizing
Mhm.
your training as you go through this process. Now, one of the things we notice, at least I've noticed in my career, and I'm a former Marine as well, and certainly done some high speed, low drag things throughout my career as well. But I've noticed that there's a difference between how I handle risk management and how my wife handles risk management. Can you speak to us
Mm.
a little bit about what you've noticed in that?
Well, that's interesting. When I have female students, especially when it's all females in a group, women talk a lot more. Women are a whole lot more likely to say, I'm uncomfortable or I'm nervous, I feel unsafe. So we openly share reservations, fears, and things, and men don't necessarily. So even one woman in a group tends to kind of instigate that behavior and openness, which is really nice. Um, and women don't seem to be as hung up on the performance pressure. They might be worried about, I don't know if I can do this, but they're willing to give it a try and try again and again. Yeah.
Mhm.
Where I often see, that men seem to get a little more frustrated or maybe even embarrassed about poor performance, but it's all learning. I mean, if they're not gonna make mistakes, then they don't need to take a class. So so I encourage mistakes and, discussion to manage them.
That's great. That's one of the things as we teach, I'm teaching a tech class right now, and I talk to my divers to say, look, you've got to ask direct questions. If you ask a group of guys, are you guys ready? Are you guys okay? They're going,
Yeah.
ask direct questions. How is your gas management plan looking? How
Yeah,
is this? How is that?
yeah,
Ask direct questions. And so we have to teach men to communicate better. And so that's
yeah.
one of the things I have absolutely positively 7 days a week learned from my wife. Ask more direct questions.
Well, I'm sure you never heard your wife say, "Hey, y'all, watch this."
No, not once, not ever. Yeah, there's a joke in Idaho where we live that as a Idahoan gets ready to hit a ditch, he says, "Hold my beer, watch this."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It is definitely a thing that I think men can learn, and it's something we
Mhm.
should learn from women. That the communication aspect of it's huge.
Yeah, I think
Be
so.
better communicators. So, so absolutely. So this one comes from another one of our friends. This is from a diver we know named Jill. Oddly enough, she says, "Can you share an incident where gender has been seen as a disadvantage, and how did you prove them wrong on that?"
Oh, yeah, plenty. Yeah, I literally had a commercial diving instructor, tell me there was no room for women in commercial diving, and if I just wanted to go train dolphins, there was, other ways to do that. Um, yeah, so and that was when I was trying to figure out how do I make this full-time career in the water, because I was, like, already a scuba instructor, but I thought, "Alright, I could just teach, but what else do I need to do in order to make this a, you know, fully formed career for the rest of my life?" And, um, in that instance, I actually kinda walked away and went, "Oh, okay, yeah, I didn't know. Yeah, sorry." Kind of thing, after spending all this money on a weekend, workshop, but yeah, I found another way. Or when I went to Antarctica, the National Science Foundation would not give us a permit for, our scientific project because you have to have a permit to go do scientific work in Antarctica. They would not grant us a permit because I wanted to use rebreathers. And they said, "Oh, that's dangerous. We don't have any standards for rebreather use in Antarctica. We'll give you a permit if you use open circuit technology." And I'm like, "Oh, no, no, no. I'm cave diving inside an iceberg. I'm not going to use open circuit gas. Sorry." You know. And they went, "Sorry, no permit." So we got a permit from New Zealand instead, and more than a decade later, the guy that declined my permit actually, met up with me at a rebreather function and went, "Aha, now we're finally looking at it."
Oh, that's amazing. Wow, there you have it. From the woman herself, this ends part one of our two-part series with Jill Heinerth. We have talked about a ton. from everything from how she got started in the dive industry to what drew her to cave diving, as well as how technology has advanced in the industry as well, and she uses it to her advantage. We talked about some really serious things, about how she manages her expectations and anxiety while diving some of these amazing dives. We talked about her approach in mentoring and what happens if we fail. In Jill's words, we don't fail, we only learn. They're just small setbacks. My personal favorite, we talked about her an oh crap moment with Jill and what happened and how she handled that process. Surprising to learn how she handled that and what she did. We also talked about other things, that how she got through the doubts in her life as well. Now, in part 2, we're going to ask a lot more questions. We're going to dive even deeper into how she moved past some of those biggest challenges, what were successes in her life, and what she did to make sure to manage those risks so she could make even bigger successes in life. We talked about what she does for women role models as well. Now, again, my name is Benjamin Hadfield. I'm a technical dive instructor with Teach Me to Dive, and I connect divers with dive shops worldwide, as well as instructors and education. Again, make sure to pay attention and watch for part 2 coming very soon.